Well, good morning and welcome as we start a new series this Sunday. Pastor Don is using Adam Hamilton's book, his study, Why? And it deals with questions that we all struggle with in our faith of why do some things happen? Why does God allow this? Those type of questions. And today we look at why do the innocent suffer? And the scripture reference that we're using to get started in this is from Genesis, the first chapter, verses 27 and 28. God created humankind in his image. In the image of God he created them. Male and female he created them. God blessed them, and God said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the air, and over every living thing that moves upon the earth." There is I call these mystical words that we throw around in religion that has been attached to this. And that word is theodice, Theodice. And it's made up of comes from two Greek words, the first meaning God, and the second justice. And so these questions of why do things happen, and why does God allow some of the events to happen in the world around us, have been lumped under this word theodice. And a whole new field of study is evolving into looking at this aspect. There are two assumptions that when we look at why do the innocent suffer, there are two assumptions that seem to be very prevalent. The first is that God protects, God takes care of the good people, his people. And I can relate to that all too well. Early in my faith journey, it seems like it seemed more older than it was at the time, but in my early 20s, in my faith and understanding of God, and then I received, after Jenny and I got married, and she was expecting what turned out to be our only child, Bill. And I got orders to go to Vietnam. And that was a period of time for me of trying to make sense out of, I'm one of God's people. He's supposed to take care of me. Why am I having to do this? Go into harm's way there. And I felt that God had abandoned me. So that idea of God protects and takes care of people, I can see how that comes into our mindset and thinking about events that come along in our lives. And the second goes along with that, but from a different angle, that everything that happens for a reason. And this is one that in my pastoral ministry in particular, that I have had to deal with over and over again. When a tragedy happens to a family, and inevitably somebody will say something to the effect that, oh, God had a reason for this. A child dies in a tragic accident, and somebody will say, well, God needed an angel. There is nothing in Scripture that I have found that will support that viewpoint, but yet it is a very, very prevalent viewpoint that you find it all across Christianity and people of faith. There are three aspects that come out of the Scripture. Four really. but three that deal with this idea or directly relate to this of God at work in the world and the tragedies that take place. The first is that we're created in the image of God there. And that as such, we are told that we are to have dominion over the earth. In other words, we're in charge. Going along with that is that humanity has a freedom, that we're not puppets that God has created, that God, the master, puppet master, stands up there and pulls the strings, and we move and we act in accordance with his will. We're created in his image, but we're created with a freedom. There are no strings attached for us to do as we see fit. And then that carries along with it human nature, that there is a rebellious streak that runs through us, runs through humanity, but individually that causes us to turn from God, to think that we know better than God. Now, fresh on my mind at least, in turning to this, is the hurricane Ian, that went through Puerto Rico and still recovering from another hurricane. And the people there on that island are again without power, infrastructure wiped out. Many people died as a result of that. And then you move over to Florida, and the whole community of Fort Myers is wiped out. That for all practical purposes right now is uninhabitable. And then you come along the East Coast and the flooding that has taken place there. So where's God in this?
Well, for one thing, the weather, the current horrible weather that we have, well, we don't, but other people have, is the result of our own ignorance and not caring about what goes on in the world. Climate change has to be the cause of it. There just can't be any, I mean, there isn't anything else. And that's on us. And we didn't even know it for how many thousands and thousands of years.
So you come back to, we have dominion over the earth, and we have freedom, and then our human nature that we know better than God.
Yeah, right, all of it.
Right. That's why I wanted to bring that back out, since you mentioned that. Earthquakes are another item that comes up that causes devastation. And one of the things that Adam Hamilton pointed out is that that you get into a geopolitical discussion when you look at some of the loss of life that occurs. That what are the geopolitical decisions that were made that funnel people into these high-risk areas?
Yeah.
Now, California is a whole different story. You know, the building out there and the congestion that is all concentrated into those areas that are earthquake prone are a different story. But in other areas of the world, what he says makes sense about geopolitical decisions that force people to live in at-risk areas. And so humanity has some accountability for those in that situation, as it does over the global warming and the climate change that's entering into there.
Well, I think even with the climate and storms and stuff, the Bible has so many stories about what happened to single people like Job. The devil and God had a disagreement about how Job was going to act, who he's going to turn his attention and follow. But the people that Job had, his wife, kids, all of those, God let them, devil, kill them off. So why were they the consequences of what God and the devil had over Job's, or whether he was loyal or not? Why did these people have to suffer the consequences because of disagreement over Job's loyalty? And all his crops, his animals, all of those were destroyed. Why did all of that happen just over the conflict of one man? Why was that so important that all these other people had to suffer and lose their lives? And he lost all of his, what do you call it, notoriety or whatever, and gave him all his suffering, all the different things that happened to him. Why did all these others have to suffer because of that one conflict between the devil and God about Job's loyalty? That was one person. How many kids did he have, or wives, servants?
A bunch.
All of those suffered consequences. That's my big question as to why, like, good things, bad things happen to good people, like we had in a Sunday school class one time with Ann Jackson. Why does bad things happen to good people?
Yeah, Chuck Swindoll, he's not as active in his radio ministry as he used to be, but that was one of the series that he did, and tried to explore that somewhat.
That's a question I have. I can't get my mind around why did all these other people suffer the consequence between doing the suffering of one person?
Well,
The loyalty part of it.
I think the way I read Job is not as literal truth, but as a cautionary tale, and that the point of it all, when you read the whole thing, is, who are you? You're a man. Why do you even question me? I mean, if I were God, why all this isn't it isn't your job to understand this. Your only job is to love me, to obey me, to do what I say. And
Well, the devil was the one that was questioning about the loyalty. Job still was loyal. He didn't waver in his loyalty to God. The devil was questioning it, said, hey,
but
can I change him?
as you go through it, Job does rail at God somewhat, and that's what God says is, I'm God and you're not. You can't understand it, is the way I take that. You can't understand what happens because I'm God.
But
Now I understand.
going back to where I started, as you can see, this Theodicy, there is a wide area of study that you can get into there. Some people would call it a wormhole, that you start down it and you keep going and going and going, and you wonder where you're going to end up. But where I started with those two assumptions that invade or work their way into our faith. In my own personal example of my questioning where God was when I was sent to Vietnam, there were two events. The first, it took me probably 20 some years or longer for it to sink into my consciousness of what had happened there. But we had water heaters that we used, very primitive, very dangerous. It was a belly tank off of a fighter that somebody had cut a hole in the top of it, and you had this immersion heater that they stuck down in it. And the heater, you had gas can, a petcock, and you turned it so it just would drip gas down in it. And you lit it down inside of it and it would burn. And as long as you had it where it was just dripping just right, then it would maintain a fire and would heat the water. It was my job, this was mounted up on top of our shower. And it was it rotated around, but one day when it was my job to light the water heater, I let too much gas run down in there. And when I lit it, it blew up in my face. Literally burned my eyebrows off. And the shower was about the size of these two tables together. And I'm wandering around up on top of there. Can't see. I seem to recall I had my hands over my eyes or what, and very distinctly heard a voice say, "Stop, stand still." And if I hadn't stopped and stood still, I'd have walked off the edge of the shower stall and would have caused myself some bodily injury there. The other event happened almost 20 years later. I had the opportunity to go to what was called the Bishops' Gathering in Fort Worth, Texas, where the bishops had decided to try to get together as much of the leadership of our United Methodist Church as they could get into one place, and to meet with all the boards and agencies of the United Methodist Church in one place. And as I say, I was able to go and spend 4 days there in the Fort Worth Convention Center. On Sunday morning, I shared a cab with a young man. He was about my age. His name was Stu England. And we went to the airport. We were flying on the same airline, and we had about 2 or 3 hours to kill after we got to the airport before our plane. And we started comparing notes and talking about our lives. And turned out he had been in Vietnam the same time that I had been there. He was a military policeman. And where I went and thought that God had deserted me, Stu went and said, "God, what can I do?" And he spent the time that he was there, his free time, working with an orphanage with children. Here again, it took me a little while after that to understand what God was telling me there, that he'd been there with me all along. God doesn't abandon us. The words of the 23rd Psalm that, we walk through some dark valleys in our life, but we're never alone. But as Jenny said, there are many things that we just don't understand. But our part is to trust God, that God's in control ultimately in there. But that doesn't answer the why questions. Next week, we will move on in this series, and we will be looking at the question of, why do my prayers go unanswered? Another one of those great why questions there. Well, thank you all for your participation, and hope to see you in church later on this morning, and may God's blessings be upon you.